Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is not a movie that I went into thinking that I would like as much as I did, kind of like the opposite of how I felt about the Eternals. I wanted to like the Eternals movie a lot, and kind of didn't. This movie, I actually thought I would go into it liking it a fair amount, but not really, but I actually really enjoyed it. I thought the story was great, the characters were very well written and had their own little arcs through the film, and their motivations of each character was very relatable and understandable. The soundtrack and the visuals of this movie are actually incredible and show a lot of love for not only Asian filmmaking, but also Asian culture in general. Just beautiful scenery left and right, and the music only enhances that experience. Although I like this movie a lot, I do have some subtle dislikes about the film, and I'll go ahead and get those out of the way at first. I will be saying Sean and not Shang-Chi, and I'll probably be pronouncing characters' names wrong from time to time. I tend to stutter and accidentally slur words together because I do talk relatively quickly for my own good, so just keep that in mind. So without further ado, my marvelous peeps, let's talk about the dislikes. The character of Katie originally I didn't really care for. I figured her comedy was a little bit much for me, but on the second or third viewing I actually kind of started to grow to like her a little bit, and I'll explain why later. But comedy seems to be something that is somewhat on the fence to me when it comes to Marvel movies in general. Everybody knows that Marvel kind of stays away from the dark and gritty to maintain this kid-friendly, Disney-esque sort of comedy that everyone can enjoy regardless of their age. That being said, I think Marvel could significantly improve if they would allow the emotions of a scene to either die off naturally and slowly, or have something that is emotional be the final part of one scene as it leads to the next scene. The best example, or I guess worst example of this, is when you learn the dark and emotional past of Sean and how he was raised and trained in a very harsh environment. He was trained to endure pain as well as inflict it onto others, and the tension is built up to a good point and is brought to an abrupt halt when a flight attendant interrupts them and asks about their food preferences. Now I know Marvel is known for their comedy in their movies, but during one of the most tense, emotional, somewhat dark moments of this film, they gotta let the tension build and then let it settle naturally so that we feel it for the rest of the film, or at least the next few minutes. They need to stop interrupting it with pointless comedy. I can go 2 minutes without hearing a joke, Marvel, I swear I can, and Katie's reaction is the same as mine. And as soon as she leaves, or the flight attendant leaves, it gets right back to the tense talk about his past, so why interrupt it with comedy in the first place? But what else did I not like? I thought the masked man from Sean's childhood would be more important later, but he really isn't, and that's kind of disappointing. And I don't get to see a lot more of the Ten Rings in combat. Not that you don't get to see them a lot, because you do. I just love them. And I guess that's really it. So now we're going to talk about what we like about this movie, and it's quite extensive. I like that they kept the mystery behind the origin of the rings. They left it somewhat ambiguous until the end credit scene where you actually don't learn that much more about them. I was actually wondering how they were going to make the 10 rings from the comics not be so goofy like they would seemingly be if you brought them straight from the page to the big screen. In the comics, the 10 rings all have 10 different abilities and the wielder gets to use all of them, one of them being like electromagnetic and concussive blast, another one being fire, ice, lightning projection, stuff like that. And in the comics, things like that can go very well and easily into a villain, but in the MCU, I was a little worried that it was going to be too campy. But the rings themselves in the movie are, they're so freaking cool. They seem to have the ability to do just about anything the wielder can imagine them doing. They're used to grab things, they're used as whips, concussive blasts forward and even underground. They're like great force fields of some kind, and even launch the wielder into the air. I love these things, and I hope that they do the origin some justice just because I really want to see more of these in the future of the MCU. They also don't interrupt the flow of combat in the movie, which I thought would be a kind of a hard thing to do. The best fighting movies, especially like karate and martial arts films, have a certain flow and rhythm to combat. Having these big bulky rings flying around you I thought would interrupt that flow and make it more of a hack and slash sort of fight, which isn't what I wanted. And I know it isn't about what I want, but you get my point. I wanted the fight scenes with the rings to be very smooth and flow very easily with the choreography that is used during other martial arts scenes, rather than the movie being an homage to martial arts and the other half of the movie be with the 10 rings. And this movie blends those two styles beautifully together, which leads me to my next topic, which is the choreography. It basically goes without saying that the choreography in this movie is really good and very well thought out, because every action sequence in this movie either has some sort of emotional tie or some sort of physical gimmick that makes it better. The bus scene that was released as a teaser initially is incredible because at first you get to see how Sean takes on multiple people at once and how he excels at hand-to-hand combat and then uses the environment around him to his aid. Although grabbing that chick's laptop and then having it cut in half just to hand it back to her was kind of questionable on his part, but then you see how the bus is getting torn apart slowly, Katie gets to use some sick driving skills on the bus to keep it safe, and Sean pieces together how to save the people as well as separate him from the attackers while going outside, on top of, around, in front of the bus, which was freaking dope. And the soundtrack to this scene is amazing, and I wanted that song for my gym playlist for sure. So that scene has a physical gimmick that kind of raised the stakes and made it more interesting. But the scene where Sean and his sister fight in the ring, that has much more of an emotional tie. Sean wants to find his sister so he can protect her from their father, and his sister wants to basically fight him in the ring as payback for basically leaving her with their father in the first place. Which is very understandable because they both were very scared of their dad growing up, Sean more so because he actually got beat and trained to be a warrior slash assassin, where his sister was basically just neglected and forgotten about and left to the side. The reason for this is basically because she is a walking reminder of his wife that he no longer has. So there's a lot of emotional ties there. The fight that takes place on the side of a skyscraper is clearly a physical gimmick to make it more interesting and threatening. It gives you another look for how Sean is when he works with the environment around him to assist him in battle, which actually makes him a very smart fighter. Then his sister comes back for all the assist medals, and eventually their father actually shows up to take control and bring them back home, which leads to another somewhat of a fight scene, sort of, mixed with a car chase, where Katie shows off some more driving skills and they narrowly escape their father's compound. The mother's name is Ying Li, and the father's name is Wen Wu, and the opening scene between these two is incredible. This scene in particular shows so much love for Asian culture and the style of movies that this one was inspired by not only getting us to watch how they fight, how she and he fight individually, very different styles, but also how they fall in love with each other through their actions. Because through their whole fight, there were very little words exchanged between them two, it's just them going back and forth. Now, Wang Wu did not come here to find a woman to fall in love with, he came here for power, so the fact that he is in this state, very emotionally tied with this woman in a sort of dance, makes it so much more compelling. Now, you could say that he falls in love with someone who he cannot take down because of the power, quote unquote, that she possesses, but either way, this scene is my favorite in the entire film, and it becomes very, very important later in the movie. Also, something interesting to note, Ying Li uses very defensive maneuvers with much grace and elegance, where Wen Wu uses very powerful strikes with a brute force, showing very differing styles from one another. So from a visual storytelling standpoint, we get to see firsthand not only how they fall in love, but also how differing they are, basically complete opposites, and I think that's what makes their love connection much more compelling. Because in this scene, you see a man who is mostly emotionless, that seeks out only power, that's all he wants, slowly fall in love with this woman through only their exchange of motion. No words are being said. And Ying Li even said that this was not the kind of person that she thought she would fall for. So if they would have skipped this initial fight between these two and just did a montage of them having a relationship, getting married, growing up, having kids, yada yada, if they just did that part, the emotional tie between these two characters would fall flat, which means the rest of the plot would eventually fall flat as well. Because we feel their love, we feel their connection, we feel this relationship between these two characters, which makes it much easier to build a plot on top of. Sean throughout the story goes from a very innocent child to an emotionless assassin to then an adult trying to escape his past and the grip of his father, and then understanding that he was a culmination of everything that came before him. His mom and his dad. The good and the bad. He carries this level of fear around his father, and he also knows that his mother was the only person to ever beat their father in combat, so he basically has to embrace both of those things and move forward. And although he carries this level of fear and hatred for his father, that does not stop him from wanting to help him in the end. He knows that his father is mentally being played with, so he wants to snap him out of that. He doesn't want to defeat him per se. So despite everything his father put him through, he still has a level of compassion and love for him. Speaking of Sean's love, I hope that they keep Katie and Sean as best friends and only friends, because that's a great quality this movie has, and I hope they keep it that way for the future. It would have been really easy and generic for them to have her become a love interest throughout the movie and end up together, and I'm so glad that they did not go down that route. Now let's talk about Katie for a second. Katie knows who has the most all-time wins in NASCAR history, which I don't even know, and I'm from the South. She's shown multiple times to be an amazing driver in fast-paced scenarios. She stole a car after saving Sean from some high school bully. But then at the end, we're supposed to believe that she has no talent and has no meaning in her life. She clearly loves to go fast like Ricky Bobby. There are people who crash into each other going straight on the highway. Like, dude, we're all going straight. How can't you figure this out? Like, this one dude rear-ended me one time in a Chick-fil-A drive-thru. How? How did you manage to... Anyways, I wonder why they didn't lean into this talent a little bit more, rather than having her pick up a bow at the end and become an Asian Hawkeye, rather than her becoming the Asian Jeff Gordon. She's mostly a comic relief character, but she does have a good relationship with Sean, and she tries to build some confidence towards the end of the movie. An elder lady in Ta Lo actually told her that if she aims at nothing, she'll hit nothing, basically saying that she has to pick a direction and commit, or she'll never succeed. And that resonates with the audience and her character mentally as well as physically when it comes to the final act of the film. Another character takes her place as the comic relief character, and I'm glad that they didn't put her into a stereotypical love interest role and allowed her to be one of the few female characters in this movie to shine through their own means and talents. Xialing being another one. I'm sorry if I'm saying her name wrong, but Xialing's character and her arc through the story is actually pretty good and pretty understandable. She loves her brother Sean and awaited his return from the mission that their father sent Sean on when he was younger. And after he never returned, she knew she had to find a way to look out for herself and is a baller through this whole movie. Now this is how you build a strong female character. She didn't wait for her brother to come back to save her. She trained in silence because she couldn't let her dad see it. She escaped when she was 16 and started her own underground empire fight club sort of thing. She's very strong, very capable, pretty much just a badass through the whole movie. But when they get to Tao Lo, she actually sits on the sidelines and watches other people train because it's so ingrained to her that she can't train along with the group. She's supposed to be on the side sitting. But after her auntie gives her some words of encouragement, she gets up, demonstrates her skills, and finally lets it all go, finally accepting this part of herself and allowing that to be shown to everybody else, and no longer living the way that her father told her she had to. I think it's safe to say that Wing Wu and the actor that portrays him carries this movie when it comes to the emotional depth of this film. He brings a level of threatening yet calming vibe every single time he's on screen, and I think he's one of the better written characters of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Okay, yes, he was a very generic I want power kind of man in his early days, but then he put that behind him when he found love. He wanted a family, and he got it. So he put the rings away and became an honest man and just lived with his family very happily. But when his past catches up to him and then they took the love of his life away, of course he's going to blame himself for that because of the fact that he took the rings off, and if he kept them on, she would still be alive because he could protect her. No one would even dare to try to come attack him or his family if he had kept them on. Then he is blinded by that same love to do whatever it takes to get her back. After he blames himself for losing his beloved wife and the mother to his children, he sees a way he can get her back, and then he tunnels in on that fact and does not consider any other factor a part of the equation. It's a very human response to this issue, and it's what makes him such an amazing character. He is a menacing conqueror that wants power, sure, and we can't, or at least I can't really relate to that. But the love story between him and his wife and what it feels like to then lose that love, blame yourself for years for that fact, and then see a possible way for you to bring her back is a very genuine and emotional journey that is very easily connected with the audience. And that's why he works so well for this story. You get to see how they fall in love with each other through their little montage after their fight about them training together and then getting married, raising a family, and he said he found something worth growing old for. He didn't need power, he didn't need to conquer anything anymore because he found love, he found family, something he didn't know that he wanted in the first place. That's what made his character arc so appealing and believable. After both of his kids leave, he's left alone again. He yearns for their mother and his wife again. So he digs into the study of where she came from, and that's how he's deceived into believing that she's still alive, because he just so desperately wants to have his family back again. You also learn that he let Sean go after he ran away during the first mission. He said that he would let him live his life for 10 years and then make him come back. Sean never actually escaped from his father, he just gave him a bigger leash. That's devious and somewhat heartwarming at the same time, but also shows you how much control he wants over every aspect of his life. Also, it's somewhat understandable because I'm sure after losing his wife, he wouldn't just let his son disappear without knowing where he was. I also like that he kind of throws shade at the Mandarin from Iron Man 3, which everybody hated, but it gives good context for the change instead of just letting it sit there as some information that Marvel hopes you forget about.
Some years ago, a terrorist from America needed a boogeyman to bring your country to its knees. The Mandarin. He gave his figurehead the name of a chicken dish.
This is Wen Wu's story about reuniting his family as much as it's Sean's story about finding his purpose and accepting his past. Though his methods were a little forceful, the only thing he really knew before Ying Li came into his life was taking things by force, so it's very understandable that he would want to approach the situation to get her back with a very forceful mindset, basically just getting whatever he wants in any way possible. Now Trevor Slattery, aka the Mandarin, aka Ben Kingsley, is hilarious in this movie. He's an actor that is slightly losing his mind, if not completely lost his mind. Just about everything that comes out of his mouth is comedy gold, and his noble sidekick Morris is great too. He is found imprisoned by Sean's father, and he leads them to Tao Lo, which is where Sean's mother is from. Well, Morris leads them, but Trevor's the translator. Say what you want about the Mandarin from Iron Man 3, but he is freaking hilarious in this film. The way the writers allowed him to be the only person that understands Morris, whether he actually can or not, it might just be voices in his head, that's the best character choice they could have made. His jokes land a lot better than Katie's did originally, but either way, I loved every scene with this character in it, and I want a Disney Plus show with Trevor and Morris. I don't care what it's about, I'll watch it. And this is my favorite scene from him in the movie.
Calm down, mate. I'm not dead, it's just a performance. Now get down here, play along.
I hear some people saying that they don't like how the movie turned from a martial arts film with a little bit of Marvel flair into basically a giant CGI fight with big monsters at the end. And although I can see where they're coming from, I don't necessarily agree with that. I can easily say I didn't expect the movie to take this sort of a turn, but I'd much rather them take a mystical approach and expand the MCU with other realms and creatures rather than do a martial arts movie where the 10 rings get explained as something invented by a mix of magic and human technology or something along those lines. I care much less about there being a big CGI fight at the end of a superhero movie if the journey to that point is very fluid and engaging. This is not the story of Wang Wu freeing the Dweller in Darkness to take over the human world because he wants power to conquer it, darkness, yada yada. It's nothing like that. It's a very human story about a man who is drowning in sorrow for his dead wife, which he believes is his own fault, and seeking a way to get her back. Yes, this movie does end in basically a giant CGI monster fight, but to say that that ruins the film basically neglects everything that came before it, and that argument kind of falls flat to me. Just about every one of the main characters has a very compelling story arc and motivations that justify their actions. So just because Marvel ended up with a CGI monster fight, that does not take away from the story, the characters, and the choreography that came before it. So for that reason, I'm giving this movie an 8 out of 10. I really liked this one. So comment down below with your thoughts on how you feel about this movie, sub to show some love, and thank you for watching.